Well, Cern and I were talking in the green room, and many of you may know that I was telling Cern I remarried just about 9.5 years, no, 8.5 years ago. And I realized this morning that the best way to marry until death do you part is to marry when you're 68. It really makes it a lot easier to get to the goal. It's a little cynical for Randy, or do you think, Cern?
It's reality. It's good. It's good to be real.
Yeah, I guess there's
Yeah.
that. Yeah, yeah.
Now, it was funny. I recently celebrated my 14th wedding anniversary, and I made a post on X and I put up some charts about how the marriage was going. And I think most people understood this, but they were basically Tesla stock charts of various kinds,
They okay.
right? Uh, you know, exactly. I just changed the name and put, the, the the Tesla drawdowns were the number of arguments that I won. So when the stock hits a new high, that's when I, win an argument kind of thing, right? Otherwise, I'm losing. And of course, people are criticizing me for saying, you should never keep track of how many arguments you win. Like they didn't realize that this was a humorous post.
Wait a minute. I think you even said this in the post. You did. It's impossible for a man to win an argument.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. You're keeping track of something that's not even a relevant real thing.
Well,
Yeah,
because if you win the argument, you lost the argument.
exactly.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So anyway, I had some fun with that. Some
yeah.
people I think understood, others didn't quite seem to get it.
I didn't know that they were not real charts. I thought that you had goose. I didn't know exactly what you'd done, but I didn't realize they were Tesla. That's funny.
Yeah.
That is pretty.
My marriage happiness probably is highly correlated with the success of Tesla. So that's, you know, it's another reason that the company needs to do well over the long term.
Well, okay. With that introduction, I bet you guys have never seen such a great cold open as that one.
It's pretty good. Well, I think we want to talk about today. There's a little bit of angst, I think, amongst many Tesla shareholders.
No, not that.
Should we discuss that a little bit?
We could. We could. To what are you referring?
Well, I'm observing that a lot of people are making statements to me along the lines of, I thought Elon was this way and now he's that way.
Like, for instance, you thought he was all about renewable energy, that the mission statement was about renewable energy. And now, what is the mission statement? It's a little less clear.
Right.
Yeah,
There's all kinds of examples,
right.
right, about his involvement in politics, his involvement with so many companies, his involvement with Doge, et cetera. And a lot of people have some very different, very specific things that they don't like, and they're anchoring on that. And they're making this sort of decision and saying, well, now, investing in Tesla doesn't fit my morals,
Mm,
doesn't align with my values anymore.
wow.
I'm not liking the direction that Elon is going or who he's become, this or that or the other.
Right, right.
Okay. And my sort of exploration of it, I wrote a post about this on X.
Uh-huh.
And the bottom line for me was, I made a statement. I said, you loved the Maverick until his moves didn't fit your morals or comfort zone. And I was sort of suggesting that it's not Elon that's changed, right? You loved him when he was a Maverick doing the things for sustainable energy and all that, but the guy is still a Maverick. A
Mhm,
Maverick is going to do what a Maverick's going to do.
mhm.
And what happens is we all put people like that in a box and we say, okay, we like Elon because of this, that, and the other, and we want him to behave in a certain way. And as long as he behaves within the boundaries of the box that we have in our mind, we're willing to look the other way, maybe for some things that are out of the box occasionally.
Right.
But then occasionally something happens and that box shifts to here. And now everything that Elon is doing seems to be out of the box. But it's us that placed the box around him. he's still the same guy,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? He's always had this juvenile sense of humor or whatever you want to call it,
Are we
however
still,
you want to
are we
characterize.
going back to talking about marriage again?
Well, there's some similarities there, isn't there? Right. And so I just find it interesting because I'm having a lot of conversations lately with a lot of shareholders,
Yeah.
and many of them are really struggling with a number of different things. Other people are super excited. I'm not suggesting everybody's like
Oh,
this,
no, 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 no.
but with anything that's politically charged,
Yes.
you're going to have a certain group of people that suddenly feel uncomfortable for whatever reason.
So I read a book years ago, actually tried to help this guy get the book out to more people because I thought it was so clever. And the title of the book was Expectations Ruin Relationships.
Yeah.
So the box that you're talking about, we could call that expectations. So whether you have and one of the examples he used was a preacher. He says, so a preacher gets up there every Sunday and he's got 300, 500, 1,000 people, whatever it is in the congregation that all have an expectation of what the preacher is going to do on that day or next week or the week before. They all have, but each one of them has their own expectation.
Yeah.
And it's easy I mean, it would be impossible for him to meet all those expectations. So Elon's in the same boat as somebody who is the most visible person in the world right now, maybe Trump or him. It's got to be one or the other. Are the most visible, most transparent people in the world. And so
Yeah.
how can they can't meet everybody's expectations. There's
No.
no possibility.
Right. And I think Elon is smart enough to recognize that he doesn't try to. He
Right,
just tries to be himself.
right.
And what I suggested in my post was that this anxiety that we're feeling is this recalibration that's happening inside us,
Mhm.
right? We projected certain things onto him. We put him in a box. He's still behaving as a maverick. We're perceiving that to be different, but yet the anxiety is us trying to put the box back around him so that we can be comfortable with making the investment again. And some people who can't do that then are making a decision to sell,
Right.
right? I just find the psychology of this interesting. And again, I'm not equipped to really analyze that. I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I don't have any of that background. But I find that kind of fascinating because investing is so much psychological.
Hmm. Yes.
It's the narratives that we tell ourselves, the stories that we tell ourselves, the beliefs that we have about where a company's going in the future. They're all narratives. They're all loosey-goosey, wishy-washy things that can change in a heartbeat.
Sure.
Now, of course, it also has something to do with the stock going down. All right, let's be honest about that. If the stock right now was hitting an all-time high, there would be a lot less anxiety about what's going on,
Right.
right? And it's kind of an interesting thought experiment. If the stock was hitting an all-time high right now, and the people that are upset for Elon for doing what they perceive he's doing and the ways that he's doing it wrong that doesn't fit in their box, would they have the same issue with him?
Right.
In many cases, no.
Right.
Right. Anyway, it's just interesting. I find myself as an advisor kind of squarely in the middle of various groups of people that are thinking very differently about the same thing that we're all seeing.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right? We're all seeing the same movie, but we're all jumping to different conclusions about it.
Sure. And what the flip side of that is why are we focusing on Elon? Because I feel fairly confident that when they were buying Apple, they might have paid a little attention to Steve Jobs as a maverick, as a brilliant guy.
Yeah.
But I don't think they were paying any attention to the way that he treated his employees. I don't think they were paying any attention to the way he was treating his ex-wife. I don't think they were paying any attention to, the methodologies that he might have employed, in terms of his competition. Um, what we have in Elon Musk is a very unique character whose transparency is he and Trump both.
Yeah.
Transparency is there's just almost no way that they can avoid not having some people upset on any given day because they're just right out there.
That's right. And Warren Redlick commented on my post too and sort of made the point that, Elon was attacked, right? Like, what do you expect him to do on behalf of the 125,000 Tesla employees? He's got to defend himself and his company
Right.
from lawfare and from attacks from the media and all the different angles it came from. Right. And so a lot of people are finding fault with him now in terms of being distracted and getting involved in politics. Well, it wasn't like he necessarily wanted to be there.
Right.
Right. And again, they see, from their view, they see him as moving outside the box that he was in
Exactly.
to this new area.
Yep.
And again, I'm just want to challenge people's beliefs about that and say, well, you're the one that put the box around them,
Right.
wherever that is. And by
Speaking of very transparent individuals, another very transparent person who's very widely admired by most, but maybe their expectations haven't been handled so well recently, is some guy named Saylor.
Hmm.
And I understand that maybe you'd like to have some conversation about what's going on with strategies, no longer micro strategies, but just strategies.
Well, you're close. It's strategy.
Oh, just strategy. No, no
Yes.
IES. Okay. Strategy.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I thought that was one of the reasons they changed their name from MicroStrategy because people were saying MicroStrategies
Oh,
and just shortened it to strategy, but apparently that's not enough.
didn't work.
Yeah. So we'll see how that goes over time. Yeah, let's talk about MicroStrategy. I think it's another interesting company with a bit of a maverick CEO
Who's well respected by many.
who's well respected by many. Yeah.
Yes.
So the company now is called Strategy. MicroStrategy is now called Strategy. It trades under the same ticker symbol as it did before, but it's Strategy with the Bitcoin symbol
Ah,
as the exponent on the end.
I
So
see. Okay.
some say Strategy B, but I think it's just Strategy.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So this is a company that is buying Bitcoin.
Right.
And this shows the number of days between their Bitcoin purchases. And lately, they've been doing it pretty much every week, with the exception of the last couple of weeks. They had their earnings announcement that took them out for a week. And then there was a big preferred stock deal that they were doing that I think delayed it a week as well.
Hmm.
But anyway, the company has now made 57 Bitcoin purchases since they started buying Bitcoin back in 2020. Okay. And the last amount of Bitcoin that they purchased, they put a couple $1 billion to work and they bought 20,356 Bitcoin.
Hmm.
It was their maybe fifth or sixth largest purchase, something in that range.
Right.
Okay. So they now hold almost 500,000 Bitcoin, which is a pretty sizable number. And we'll see just in
Yes.
a second what it looks like relative to some other holders. Um, At this point here last year, they rolled out a plan where they planned to purchase $42 billion of Bitcoin over 3 years.
Okay.
They managed to do about half of that in the last 4 months.
Wow.
So they've accelerated that plan because of market demand. They're able to sell more stock and sell more
Mhm.
convertible bonds to raise capital to buy Bitcoin. So that's been pretty impressive. So here, Chris Milas here shows the amount of Bitcoin they have. It's just under 500,000. He has a sort of a target for them of getting to 1 million. They're about 50% of the way there. And an interesting metric on the lower right, for every $1,000 price change in Bitcoin, that's half $1 billion increase on MicroStrategy's balance sheet,
Mhm.
okay, which will soon roll through the income statement as earnings, up or down, depending on
Right.
how Bitcoin
Right.
does.
Right.
So you can see with the amount of Bitcoin they own, it's become pretty sensitive to the changes in price,
Yeah, definitely.
right? This is an interesting metric. We look at the Bitcoin per share.
Hmm.
In 2020, there was 0.0005 Bitcoin per share, and now it's basically 3x
Mhm.
0.0015. How do they do this? Well, they have accretively sold securities, stock and bonds, to other investors to raise capital to buy more Bitcoin.
Right.
Okay. So when you buy a Bitcoin ETF or just buy Bitcoin directly, the Bitcoin you buy is the Bitcoin you will own. You won't accrete any more unless you put more money in. But
Mhm.
when you buy, historically, when you've bought MicroStrategy stock, the company has taken steps to acquire more Bitcoin that's accrued to the shareholders.
Right.
Okay. Now there is some dilution happening, but overall it's been accretive to the Bitcoin per share. Yeah. Now to put this into perspective in terms of how much Bitcoin MicroStrategy owns, sorry, Strategy owns, this is based on numbers in the prior week of 478,000 Bitcoin. Now it's 499. They own almost as much as global governments in the world.
Hmm. The combination of all of them.
Yeah,
Okay.
which is pretty astounding. All right, so MicroStrategy has become sort of the major corporate holder of Bitcoin in the world and on par with governments. And if you look at other companies, they're sort of head and shoulders above the other largest Bitcoin holders. Tesla's number 4 on this list.
Hmm. Interesting.
Okay, so there's a Tesla connection here too. Tesla actually at one time owned quite a bit more than this,
Right.
but still, even though they sold it down at one point because they needed the capital, um, they're still fourth.
Hmm.
Okay. Um, and Strategy owns about 75% of all the corporate Bitcoin held in the world. So there's one
Right.
player, one large
Right.
company that's the
Right.
dominant force here. So when you think about then what drives their value longer term, certainly by acquiring more Bitcoin, right? The more you own as Bitcoin does well, then that will create value for shareholders. But ultimately, it's going to be about generating revenue streams by putting part of this Bitcoin reserve to good use, right? So how can they leverage Bitcoin holdings?
Hmm.
So many people have suggested that that strategy will become a Bitcoin bank,
Right.
and in fact, that's Michael Saylor has suggested that that's the ultimate goal.
Okay.
So think of them as the JP Morgan of Bitcoin,
Right.
right? And so JP Morgan has diverse revenue streams in the traditional financial world. Strategy would try to create that too in the Bitcoin world. Now, I don't necessarily expect them to lend out Bitcoin to anybody. There's too much risk in that,
Hmm.
but they could certainly take people's Bitcoin and pay them income for that, basically issuing them a bond,
Hmm.
right? And for that, strategy would earn some fees. So there's all kinds of different things they could do with it. Um, Outside the financial world, Bitcoin will prove to be very useful as a way to secure digital assets. So just thinking of strategy as a Bitcoin bank may not be going far enough. Bitcoin is not only useful as a financial tool, just because it has the word coin in its name,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that that's all it can be used for. Okay, so think about today, for example, here's a concrete example of everybody receives spam email. How do you fix it? Well, the one easy, quick way to fix it is to charge a little bit for every email sent. And if you're a spammer and you send out 100 million emails, suddenly you're out of business because you can't afford the cost,
Hmm.
right? But if I'm sending you an email and it costs me a tenth of a cent, fine, that's no big deal. So how do you facilitate that? You can't really do that on the traditional financial rails, but some form of digital currency, digital money could facilitate that with Bitcoin serving as kind of the base layer, the secure layer, the foundation of it.
Right.
Okay. The Bitcoin network itself can handle those kinds of micropayments,
Hmm.
but there's layers that can sit on top of that. Just like today in the financial world, we have the Federal Reserve, the regional banks, and just all these different layers that sit on top. The credit card companies, Venmo, PayPal,
Hmm.
they all facilitate different levels of transactions, and then everything clears with the Federal Reserve.
Right.
Bitcoin could become that clearing mechanism for digital payments.
Hmm.
So strategy by having such a large amount of Bitcoin effectively kind of becomes the Federal Reserve of Bitcoin. and that would be valuable too. So a combination perhaps of JP Morgan plus the Fed, however you want to think about it. It's not these analogies aren't perfect because what
Right, right,
strategy is doing is something very different as well.
right. So just to be clear, the Bitcoin that they have in their on their asset sheet, those Bitcoin, they don't belong to the stockholders individually. They don't belong to the bondholders individually. They have no call on the
Correct.
specific
It's a
coin.
corporate asset.
It's a corporate asset. So technically, there's nothing to keep them from just turning around and becoming a lender. They could
Correct.
go into any kind of lending business, whether 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 it was a um, whether it was a something that was uh, maybe more troublesome, like high interest rate auto loans, or whether it was something that was safer, like mortgages. They could go into the lending business. There'd be nothing to keep them from doing that.
Correct. It's I think it's more likely that they go into the business where, let's say you had a pile of Bitcoin and you want to try to monetize that somehow.
Uh-huh.
Maybe you didn't want to sell it. You just wanted to earn some income off of it. You could
Right.
deposit that with Strategy
Mm.
and they would pay you perhaps a certain fixed rate,
Uh-huh.
right? You would still own your Bitcoin. You would
Right.
be earning income off of it, but Strategy would also be earning
Got it.
some money, perhaps from the appreciation over time. I'm
Hmm.
not sure exactly how it would be structured yet,
Yeah.
right? But Bitcoin is kind of the ultimate collateral. Um, it's a form of capital that has no issuer,
Right.
right? So it's the most secure form of collateral there really is. So this is a longer term play. Right now, strategy is in the game of acquiring as much as they can. That's where they are right
Right.
now.
Right.
What we've just been talking about is that future at some point.
Sure.
Now, one of the ways that they're doing this is they've sort of become what a lot of people refer to as this Bitcoin refinery, right? So they're buying Bitcoin, putting it on their balance sheet, and then they're issuing securities to people that want them, that want Bitcoin exposure, that really can't get it directly.
Mhm.
Either they don't want to, or by certain rules they can't. If you're an insurance company, if you're a pension plan, there might be some things that preclude you from buying Bitcoin directly,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? Or insurance companies want to buy a lot of bonds and preferred stock. Well, strategy is making those instruments available. None have existed before.
Right.
They just recently came out with a preferred stock offering that's paying 8%, right? And it's linked, it's a security of strategy. The security itself is called Strike.
Mm.
It's a preferred stock that pays 8% and it's linked essentially to the Bitcoin on their balance sheet.
Right.
That's a security that never existed before. It's meeting a need in the marketplace. People want income. Insurance companies want, higher income security. It's diversifying their current portfolio. So these securities that strategy is producing, it's a bit like taking ExxonMobil, putting crude oil through their business and creating all these
Mhm.
refined products, whether it's
Mhm.
jet fuel, whether it's
Mhm.
chemicals, etc.
Yeah.
And meeting different needs in the marketplace. So that's kind of one way to think about what strategy is doing with Bitcoin. Now, another thing that's really interesting from a shareholder perspective is, again, if you buy shares in this company, over time, you should expect to accrete more shares. And so I've begun to track what strategy calls Bitcoin yield,
Hmm.
is basically how much extra Bitcoin are you getting over time. Now, this number is just showing since the start of the year, and right now we're up to about 7% already at the end of February. Okay, so what I do is just kind of take that trend and say, okay, if we continue at that rate for the rest of the year, the Bitcoin yield now will be more than 50% this year.
Hmm.
Last year, by the way, I think it was like 74%. So based on the purchases that have done this year, if that continues at that pace with the number of days left in the year, we're looking at, 50 some percent. Now, of course, these projections could change quite dramatically if
Sure.
they slow down the pace of the purchases.
Sure.
But just to kind of show people where we're at in this process of accreting more Bitcoin to the shareholders.
Mhm.
Okay. There's no projection here other than it's just math.
Right.
So I'm not suggesting that they're going to finish the year with a 50%,
Right.
Bitcoin yield. But if they continue these purchases, that's where they would be. Keep track of the average cost per Bitcoin. Of course, they keep buying as Bitcoin goes up and goes down. But the difference, they've made money in this strategy since 2020.
Mhm.
Difference between the white line and that green line.
Okay.
And the cumulative gains now are about 15 billion, and it's fluctuated between 15 and 20 billion for the last few months. Strategy has a great website now. They have this sort of metric dashboard on the website, and you can kind of keep track on a whole bunch of different things. In the middle here is the Bitcoin count with the B next to it, close to 500,000. And they show what that's worth. It's 40 at the time I did this when Bitcoin was at 95 $1,000, now less than that. Um, the total value of their Bitcoin was about 48 billion.
Mhm.
And this number here, this MNAV, shows the value of strategy stock in relation to this Bitcoin NAV. How much more of a premium is their stock trading relative to the Bitcoin they own? And it's 1.82 times right now.
Mhm.
Whereas when I did this, when I took this image, this is what allows them to sell stock and buy Bitcoin and accrete value to shareholders because they're selling their stock for almost twice
Mhm.
what the
Mhm.
Bitcoin is worth on the
Yeah.
balance sheet,
Yeah.
right? With the bonds, because strategy stock is so volatile, what they do is they sell convertible bonds. Actually, we'll get to that in a second. Here's the frequency of the purchases shown over the Bitcoin price. Michael Saylor has commented a number of times that he will keep buying Bitcoin at the market peaks. He'll always be buying at the market peaks.
Mhm.
Some people in the strategy community have suggested he try to time this market a little bit
Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
Well, good luck, right? It's like timing anything. How do you know when anything, whether it's Tesla or Bitcoin goes down 30, 40, 50%?
Right.
It's pretty tough. Um, this is again on their website. These are all metrics there. They keep track of the, 1 year return, for example, on the stock, outpaced pretty much everything else. And this is the list of convertible bonds that they have. So as I mentioned, that they buy more Bitcoin by selling stock, and they also buy more Bitcoin by issuing debt. And the debt instrument of choice that they've used is largely convertible bonds. Convertible bond is a regular bond plus a call option. Call options only have value if there's volatility. If your stock was flat, a call option would be worthless.
Mhm.
There'd be no chance of getting a higher price in the future. MicroStrategy is kind of engineered to be a volatile stock. That maximizes the call options, which maximizes the value of the convertible bond, which allows MicroStrategy to buy more Bitcoin. A lot of people love the upside volatility. They hate the downside volatility, just like we're seeing in Tesla stock.
Mhm.
But it's this downside volatility that's actually allowing strategy to execute their
Buys.
program of buying more Bitcoin.
Mhm.
So this is an example of volatility actually is a good thing. It's allowing this company to acquire a lot of Bitcoin.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's a wild ride for shareholders, but hopefully over time that roller coaster goes ever higher, right? Particularly if Bitcoin appreciates and people find other uses for it, and so on. Okay. So anyway, their website here is a treasure trove of good information,
Yeah.
up-to-date information on the company. It's a really nice dashboard. So those are the charts, Randy.
Okay.
Um, I think that the world of AI and the world of Bitcoin are heading for a collision course in a positive way.
Okay.
And you may have heard me say this before, but in a world of AI agents, we need a form of internet money that is not controlled by any government
Mhm.
It's not controlled by any institution. You could freely move money anywhere in the world at any time. And there's pros and cons to that. I understand from you know, from a drug dealer's perspective that nation states may not want that.
Yes,
But
yes.
just from an ease of use standpoint and an efficiency standpoint, that would be a good thing.
Mhm.
And also, we need a form of money where we can transact in fractions of cents.
Right.
And I don't know about you, but if you tried to send an international wire for 3 cents, it's not going to work.
Not gonna work.
And if we have AI agents doing that for us, there needs to be no friction in these transactions. They need to be able to transact amongst themselves instantly, right? For that to work.
Right.
And so as Tesla and NVIDIA and others are pushing this AI envelope, we need this safe, secure form of internet money, and Bitcoin can serve as the base layer for that.
Okay, so this last week, there was a lot of concern, a lot of confusion. There was two things that happened. One is we had one of the other players who got hacked to
Mm,
the tune of 1.5 billion, threw a big scare into the entire market.
yeah.
That play, I forget the name of the player who thought
Ethereum.
in Ethereum. They quickly said, "Look, we've got you covered. We will pay off anybody that wants out." So I guess it was kind of like a run on the bank, and the bank had enough. We'll see the movie on that later, since we've already seen the run on the bank movie. So they were able to cover. So they calmed nerves, calmed people's fears. Then at the same time, and people have charted this, uh, Bitcoin and the entire crypto market dropped pretty much at the same rate as
Yeah.
Tesla.
Yeah.
And also strategy did as well. In
Yeah.
fact, people have said that the strategy chart is really close to Tesla's chart, and have made a big deal about that. So what happens? Is there a point at which if Bitcoin goes down even more than the 40% or whatever, so like 30 something percent now, I think, from the all-time high, from so it's one point, it was at 109, and now it's at about 85.
Yeah.
So it's about
It's a healthy
30%,
decline.
like if there's 30%. So is there a point at which there's some danger of some of this stuff actually collapsing?
So there's a lot to unpack there in your questions. So first of all,
Sorry.
yeah, no, that's great. Just to address the last part first.
Sure.
Strategy is employing some leverage. The leverage that they have right now, I think, is about 16 to 18%, depending
Okay.
on the day.
Okay.
So pretty low levels.
Yeah.
Bitcoin would have to plummet to extremely low levels and stay there for a long time because these convertible bonds don't come due for many years in many cases.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not a lot of risk there in terms of that. They talk about using leverage intelligently,
Mm-hmm.
right? And Bitcoin typically has moved in a 4-year cycle. Many of these bonds mature outside of that cycle.
Got it.
So they've tried to risk mitigate that as much as possible. Just on the Ethereum issue,
Mm-hmm.
this actually is a great instructive lesson about the difference between Bitcoin
Mm-hmm.
and pretty much every other crypto asset out there. Decentralization. Ethereum is controlled by a group of people. If you trust them to do the right thing, that control can be favorable when bad things happen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? If you don't know for sure whether they'll have your back the next time something bad happens, then suddenly now you've put yourself at risk. It's like the full faith and credit of the US government. Do we trust the government to do the right thing? Well, years ago, maybe many of us said, yeah, sure, it's the US government. What can go wrong? Okay. And again, the example I use with that is in Canada, the Canadian truckers were peacefully protesting.
Right.
Government ruled it an illegal protest. The government froze their bank accounts
Right.
as a way to force them to leave, right?
Right.
We're going to take your
Right.
money, you're going to go.
Right.
So right there's a negative of decentralization that can go sideways pretty
Mhm.
quickly.
Mhm. Mhm.
Bitcoin doesn't have a board of directors. There's no CEO of Bitcoin. There's no one that controls Bitcoin. It's a decentralized network, computers around the world
Right.
that use physical power to constrain bad actors.
Mhm.
You have to bring a lot of physical power in order to do anything bad in the Bitcoin network. And that's what makes it so beautiful, because it's not controlled by anybody. It's kind of the world's money.
Right.
And that, I think, has many positives. There's also some negatives, but overall, I think it's a net positive, right? To have a free system in the world that no one controls,
Right.
that when Russia attacks Ukraine, the US takes them out of the SWIFT banking network,
Yeah.
right? And you could argue, sure, I can see why they should do
You
that
do that.
because,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
that has consequences,
Yeah.
right? And so Bitcoin doesn't have these problems that Ethereum does. Now, Ethereum can certainly go back and rewrite history. That's fine. But it
Mhm.
also tells you the next time it may not be fine,
Mhm. Mhm.
particularly if somebody arbitrarily takes it away from you when you think it's not fair.
Sure. Sure.
Now, in the case of the North Korea hack, you're like, fine, take it away from them. Everybody's in agreement with that. But maybe the next time it's not so clean, not so clear.
Right. Okay. So putting a couple of those thoughts together, Michael Saylor and his organization now has control of a very large pile of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
We saw the Hunt brothers, I think, try to control the silver market,
Yeah.
and that was not a very good thing.
Well, you want to talk about transparency. Saylor is doing it in the most transparent way you could imagine.
Right.
That
So he's
wasn't true of the Hunt brothers.
right. Yes, exactly. So are there dangers, however, in having one organization have that kind of percentage ownership? Because we're now looking at where the United States may come in and become as big a holder as Michael Saylor or even bigger. So now you're talking about a sovereign nation
Yeah.
having that kind of power. So what have you thought about that? How are you looking at those kind of control issues?
Yeah. In one sense, I'm not that worried about it because strategy is made up of, hundreds of thousands of shareholders. Sure, Michael Saylor controls, I think, 46% of the voting power of the company, right? So he's got a pretty solid
Yeah,
position. Elon probably wishes he had 46% of the voting power of Tesla,
right. Like
right?
you did with SpaceX.
Yeah, right. So Saylor's in a strong position with that. So there is some trust in Saylor that he's going to do the right thing.
Mhm.
There's also the risk that if strategy kind of screws up the security of holding their Bitcoin, that puts it at risk, right? And so you have to trust that they're doing the right thing there. And they don't disclose specifically how they're handling that because they don't want to give anybody any clues about what they're doing.
Sure.
So that's kind of hush hush. But public companies have auditors and teams of people to
Sure.
risk manage these different things.
Mhm. Mhm.
Holding Bitcoin personally actually is a very risky endeavor. If you mess that up, you could lose your Bitcoin forever, and many people have.
Sure.
And think of that as giving a gift to humanity.
Right.
There's only a certain amount of money in the world. You lose your money, then the rest of the money is worth more, right? Um, so short term, I'm not so worried about strategy holding it. That we've got ETFs now that hold a lot. We have some governments that hold a lot. Most of it is still in individual hands. Okay. Long term, however, I'm worried about this. Um, because Bitcoin is probably the best form of digital security that we've ever invented. Digital security today relies on software and it
Mhm.
relies on administrative rights, somebody holding the keys, somebody
Right.
being the administrator to let everybody else in.
Right.
That is not a system that works perfectly. Bitcoin can protect digital assets by not giving anybody administrative rights.
Mhm. Mhm.
It cannot be hacked. It's never been hacked.
Mhm.
It relies on physical power to constrain bad actors from doing things.
Right.
So, in that sense, you could look at Bitcoin as a defense system to protect digital assets, whether it's digital money
Mhm,
or
mhm,
other things of value that are in cyberspace.
mhm, mhm,
Jason Lowery, for example, in his book Soft War, has argued that the US military should be interested in this. Just like we have aircraft carrier battle groups and the Army and the Air Force protecting US interests around the world,
mhm.
we need a US hash force to protect our digital interests. Now, he's worried lately that if a company like Strategy acquires so much Bitcoin, what's to stop the US government from coming one day and saying, we're going to nationalize you because you have the biggest pile of Bitcoin. We want it to protect everybody's interests. We're going to nationalize you. And he worries about that because if the US government doesn't realize what Bitcoin truly is, it's
Mhm,
not just digital money, it's digital security, and that's bigger than digital money.
mhm.
If the government doesn't recognize what that is, then one day they'll be forced to take drastic action like nationalizing a company. And the US government has nationalized companies before.
Sure.
Look what they did with gold at one
Mhm.
point. It was illegal for people to own gold.
Sure.
Could be the same thing with Bitcoin. So in that case, if you're worried about that, then you want to own Bitcoin yourself directly that no one can take away from you.
So what about the other side of that kind of control? What about manipulating the market?
That's always an issue. Bitcoin is worth a couple trillion. So you can manipulate that. It's a 24-hour market. It's a global market. So it's thinner than a $2 trillion market cap would imply because Tesla doesn't trade 24 hours a day,
Right.
right? So all of Tesla's trades fit like in an 8-hour trading window or something like that. With Bitcoin, it's 24 hours. So there's more trading around the world. It's pretty easy to manipulate at this point. So if you have a short-term strategy, then the manipulation's a risk. If you have a long-term strategy, the fluctuation in Bitcoin is a positive. So it just depends on what your time frame is.
Mhm, mhm.
But as it becomes more valuable, it'll be harder and harder to manipulate it.
Yeah. I was thinking in terms of the concentration of ownership, though. That was my bigger thought with regard to manipulation. If Michael Saylor has this large holding, he would
Yeah.
be maybe in a position to create a lot more, and especially especially if they do get the friction down to where the in and out can be faster.
Hmm. Yeah. But these are just all technological problems that will
Right.
be worked on and solved.
Right.
The way the system works today is the worst it'll ever be at this point forward. Just like we say about humanoid robots
Right.
and Tesla's FSD.
Yeah. Yeah.
These things are only going to get better,
Hmm.
right? And one day we'll wake up and we'll discover that we do truly have a form of internet money that we wish we would have had 20 years ago. And, it exists and it works beautifully.
Right.
And
Right.
no nation state has control over it. And that would be probably a good thing for particularly many people in countries that suffer from massive inflation,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? It's a
Right.
viable way then for them to store value without worrying about the government inflating the value away.
All right. Well, great conversation. Those are some of the questions that have been on my mind for a while. I'm glad we had a chance to talk that over. You watch this thing on a daily basis. I watch it on a daily basis, not because I understand it, but because it's just one more thing that there is patterns to and everything else. So after this big sell-off, are you expecting any particular directionality in the short or medium term?
Yes, it's going to be volatile. Um, I mean, my view is that Tesla fundamentally is heading in a great direction. That Bitcoin is heading in a great direction because of its utility potential. And it's kind of there, just kind of waiting to be discovered and waiting to be used. It's a bit like, the caveman and walking around and seeing gold and not having any understanding what that is or what it could be,
Right.
right? They didn't care.
Yeah.
But eventually it was discovered as, oh, this is now a good form of money, a store of value.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
for thousands of years now, we've treated it as such. But now we've invented something that is even better than that.
Yeah.
that has a cap on the supply, whereas gold, you can go mine more. There's plenty of gold in the world. You just need to mine it,
Right.
right? Um, yeah.
So do you have any sense of why Tesla and Bitcoin would be trading so similarly? Would it be a risk on, risk off kind of
Yeah.
thing? Yeah.
They're both the ultimate risk on, risk off assets,
Okay.
particularly Bitcoin because you can trade it at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
So if you're worried about a development anywhere in the world, go
Right.
sell the Bitcoin first because you can get instant liquidity.
Hmm.
You can't get that with Tesla.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So is there any evidence of one leading the other?
I don't know. I haven't looked at it that closely. I'm not particularly,
Well,
focused on
that would be an
trading.
interesting the kind of thing that you do though, CERN. Maybe we should.
Yeah. The challenge with the Bitcoin data, which I have,
Yeah.
it's a 24/7 market. When you
Yeah.
put it on a spreadsheet next to Tesla, you've got this massive date mismatch.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
Yeah. Yeah.
becomes a bit of a challenge to,
Yeah.
map it all. But
Yeah.
with
Well,
AI, with my friend Optimus here helping me, maybe I can figure it out.
that's right. You could use the open close routine that you just did.
Well,
Yeah.
there's no open close with
Well, I'm just saying you take Bitcoin though at the opening of the market and the close of
yeah,
the
yeah,
market as a
yeah,
as that'd be the closest I think you could come.
yep.
All right, super fascinating. Yeah, so I'm sure in the future we'll be hearing more from you about Bitcoin and about strategy. And then there's always um I'm sorry, CERN. I'm sorry that brilliant. I'm always having a hard time. The name of your company is so brilliant, and yet it's hard to remember for some reason. I don't know. So for those of you out there who think he's brilliant, even though he claims that the name brilliant has to do with how bright and shiny the company is, something like that, or your head is. I'm not
But it
sure.
could be. It's probably that. That's right.
Some kind of, I'm not sure. The
Yeah.
brilliant thing, yes. He's not making any claims about what's between his ears. It's more of a
That's a good one, Randy. Thank you for
okay,
that.
all right, okay. We'll stop there. Give him a call if you're thinking that you need somebody to blame the fact that Tesla or Bitcoin is down right now.
Thanks, Randy.
Thank you, sir. It's been great talking to all of you.